over 80% of Portugal identifies as Roman Catholic, and traditions such as Santo Cristo and the Miracle of Fátima are significant to their culture. Henrique Braga has been active in Winnipeg's Portuguese Catholic Church for most of his life. Henrique comes onto U-Talk to explain these Portuguese traditions, and in light of unmarked graves discovered at residential school sites, and the Every Child Matters movement, the efforts of Winnipeg's Portuguese Catholic churches in working with Indigenous communities. Let's get into it.
Yeah, I started at a very young age. Attending activities with my father. My father loved to do some of the social events at the church. He was a choir member. I would go with him. I would sing along with him. It actually helped me with the Portuguese because all the songs were in Portuguese, and you learn the language when you're actually singing the song. And you know, as the church evolved, the community evolved. They needed a bigger place. We were using Sacré Cœur Church on Bannatyne. It's now just a school. It used to be the church. And we had a pastor who came along who was actually from India, from Goa. But again, it was a Portuguese state at the time. And so he learned Portuguese. And then he came to support our church, Monsignor Fernandez. So as a kid, I just loved to participate and I wanted to be part of that. But when they transformed and ended up in the area we are right now, it happened to be 3 blocks away from my house. So I was really, really close. And so whenever there was a need for something, I would get a call and say, Henry, come down here, check it out. We need you. So I think for almost 4 years, I was in church every day. To the point that I think some people thought I was going to be a priest, but I never ended up really going on with that calling. And there was something about it that, again, the soup kitchen was there. We try to help as many people as possible. We try to bring a lot of events together through the church, and really bring the Portuguese community together. It was a really good gathering, religion aside, but it was a really good gathering of bringing the Portuguese together to a common purpose, and it was really powerful.
Well, I mean, for a lot of people, church has that kind of community, that moment. Like for myself, although I'm not religious anymore, I have fond memories of like the potlucks after church, everyone coming together, talking about, how their week went, what they're looking forward to, and of course, sharing all the different foods and things that people bring in.
Yeah, religion is complicated, but one thing it did do is it often brought people together, and it was something about bringing community together. So the Catholic Church really did initially really tried to work through that and really bring the community together as much as possible.
Santo Cristo and something about Fátima. How about let's start with the Fátima. Like when Paulo was describing the story of like these 3 children, what is that all about?
Often known as the Miracle of Fátima. And so back in 1918, of course, these 3 children who are sheep herders, and they're just kind of doing their thing. And again, a very poor part of Portugal, a very, very poor part of Portugal. And they were just doing what they were doing. They really didn't anticipate. And then all of a sudden, an image appeared to them, which scared the heck out of them, obviously. It's like, what is this ghost-like looking thing? Yeah. And she really wanted to, I think, touch the hearts of these really young and innocent children. And an understanding that there were so many hardened people, they would probably just ran away. They actually accepted it. They actually were part of that. And the awe was really, really heartfelt. But then they were messengers, and they became messengers to the world. Of course, we were going through a pretty nasty war at the time, and she spoke of it and spoke about trying to bring peace. Fátima is known as the Mary. There's a lot of apparitions in the world. Fátima is just one of them, but Mary of trying to bring peace to the world, and really emphasizing the prayer of the Rosary again. It was a tradition. A lot of people prayed it, but she really, really felt that, get together with families, do some prayer together, and that will bring peace to the world. And if we forget to do that, if we're not part of that, then we're going to see sort of the chaos that was instilling in what we saw within the world wars. And that message was a kind of a hard sell. Those kids went through a real hard time. They were imprisoned at a very young age. The governors were really not happy with this because they had accumulated this gathering. People were just coming from nowhere.
Well, every time you have someone that talks about divinity, like there's always going to be pushback, like with Joan of Arc and everything like that.
Exactly, yeah. So they're like, what? Seriously? I don't know. This is who's talking here. Is this divinity or something else going on here? Type of thing. Yeah. So it was very difficult for them. They went through a lot to get their message out. But despite what the government and even the church, the church tried to dissuade them as well and say, you guys are just pulling our leg. Don't do this. You don't play with these kinds of things. And they continued. So this miracle, which extended, right? There's several times that she appeared to these children from May 13th to October 13th. And what happens is that the Portuguese have then decided to mark those days. So on May 13th, which is this Saturday, they definitely want her to come out. And so we often put her on a pedestal and carry her through some of the streets. It's usually in the evening with candlelight. And again, an understanding peacefulness comes from that candlelight. And if you actually Google it and go to Fátima in Portugal, you will see the candlelight. It's just a very, very fascinating. I think sometimes in the area, there's about 1 million people who kind of show up and with this candlelight. So again, prayer for peace, and this is what they do. But it also falls in another event that we have in the weekend, which is Santo Cristo. Yeah. And that tradition is specifically to the island of San Miguel. Now, others in the islands already are part of that, but it's very interesting, and there's a legend around that whole thing. But the convent that's there really wanted to, get everybody to understand that this bust that was kind of brought to them, and getting the Pope at the time to sort of acknowledge this thing as not just a bust, but some sort of relic or of some sorts that actually have importance. And since then, it has been a tradition. Same idea, where there are masses, but then it comes out this once a year type of thing to the masses, and basically remind them. Now we are in the Easter season still, within. From Easter until Pentecost, we keep celebrating the Easter season. But on this, I believe it's the 6th Sunday, he comes out again, a reminder of, hey, yes, we can enjoy Easter. It's great and all that kind of stuff. But remember, I still had to go through this suffering piece, And so if you actually take images and look at images of this particular bust, it is a tormented bust. Like you can see his grief in the bust, and the blood is still coming down from the crown of thorns. But at the same time, he's ordained with all these wonderful capes. And traditionally back in San Miguel, these capes came from royalty. They came from governments. They came from an acknowledgement that he is our king. And that's why they kind of do this. It's not just, hey, we're going to go flaunt this thing, we're going to go around there. No, it's an understanding that he is our king. And he was crowned for that, not necessarily a typical crown, but he was. And so we show that. We go out there, and that's what the sisters of the convent in which he stays, because he's not in a church, he's in the convent. And that's their message. They really do want everybody to understand that, it's not Easter eggs. It's not those kinds of things. Yeah. And he is our king for the suffering that he did.
Well, for people outside of Catholicism, kind of the pageantry and like the attire and everything seems a little weird at times. Can you just explain a little bit about, kind of the traditions and practices, why all these garbs, why all these items, this extra effort put into it, sort of thing?
Well, you've noticed, and this is an actually interesting question, because just last week we had the coronation of King Charles. And what did you see? What we saw is these big, massive capes and the scepters and those kinds of things, and adorned with certain jewelry and those kinds of things. And you'd think, why then would the Catholics do this, or why would this specific group of Catholics do that? And again, what they're really trying to tell everybody is that we want people to understand he is our king. And often kings do have these the clothing that comes with it, or the scepter that comes with it. And those scepters and all those things have importance in royalty, right? Those things mean that somehow you have some command, or you have some authority and you have some power. And so the tradition really wanted people to realize or understand that Jesus is authority. And so once a year, we bring him out in that glory to kind of show that authority.
It's a very different interpretation than you have from Anabaptists or Protestants that generally depict Jesus more as like the carpenter, workman, the everyday Joe sort of idea.
And it's not that we don't. We understand his humble beginnings, right? And from who he was, taking on a role that, only him and his mother really understood. And yet at the same time, we talk about him as our king. And so it is really once a year that this is done. It's not that we go showboat him all the time, but I think it's that reminder again of, hey, he is our king. And again, here are some of the things that we, as humans, understand to be king. So it's not that we think that this is how he's standing up there in heaven with these, gold and ordained and all that kind of stuff. That's not necessarily how we believe it's there, but it's a symbol that we can offer to the people that we truly believe that he is king and honored in that way at least once a year.
The potential controversy that might take place, I guess just what are the efforts that the Catholic Church, at least the ones that you're around in, working with Indigenous communities? You're in the North End, going around, and it hasn't been too long since the Every Child Matters thing has started, as well as the potential graves that were discovered and the more we've found.
And that's become very difficult initially to accept, but it's also very difficult for us as a community. The Portuguese community wasn't necessarily aware of those things. They're immigrants and they came in, so we weren't necessarily aware of those things. And so a lot of it right now is learning. And so we're spending a lot of time trying to teach truly what has happened and that it is truthful, because there is still people who want to deny that it even occurred, and it's been hard. But we are working towards getting people to understand this actually did occur, and we have to reconcile for this. The church, because it's located in the North End, not too far away from Selkirk and Main Street, has always had a soup kitchen. It's always wanted there to be supportive. We try to support some of the houses around the area. There's shelters and those kinds of things. So the church is trying to support and help people through this process. But as an ethnic church, it's a little bit more difficult because, like I said, there's a real big learning curve for them to understand exactly what has happened. And even our pastors are not necessarily from the area. Our pastor right now is actually from Brazil, in which, again, they weren't aware of some of these things. So they've had to learn. And the bishop has worked really hard at teaching them.
So it's kind of a growing period right now.
It's very much a growing period. On one side of it, I know the diocese is really trying to work through a lot of the other pieces as well. And they're working through that. It's in the media, that's going on there. But again, it's events that are horrific. These are events that unfathomable, but we also know that within the Catholic Church there are a lot of really good people who would never have thought of doing this, right? So it becomes hard. Is it the church, or is it some people of the church? And it's just hard then because everybody wants to. Well, no, it's the church because either there was a denial initially, whatever that may be. We all have to somehow take responsibility for it. And help this process of reconciliation. But like I said, when you're not aware of it, it's a learning curve.
Kind of taking those moments, understanding the history and moving forward from there, seeing like, hey, yes, these atrocities took place. Let's work together now, right? Help each other out. You have the soup kitchen and continuing to build community, right?
And that's what we're trying to do is to continue trying to build that community.
So walk me through what this weekend is going to look like. What does this procession look like? And you mentioned it takes place over like a couple of days, like during that like Easter to Pentecost sort of time.
Yeah. So Easter is obviously Easter and is a big celebration within the church, and it's in itself just Easter. Mm-hmm. And then we do continue celebrating Easter Sundays up until this weekend, where the Santo Cristo, the Christ, is prepared. So he's actually placed in a separate place outside of the church, where he's actually prepared, just like the king was. He went to a different place, got himself all dazzled up, and then he was presented to the public. Yeah. So that's kind of how we do that too. We actually present him to the public by coming out of an area in which he's been prepared. There's the tradition is that we actually knock on the door and ask permission to come in and have him come out. So we really actually do that. This year, his mother, Mary, will actually be part of the knocking on the door and having him come out. So it'll be the first time that the two images will be in procession together, son and mother. So that's going to be quite special in many different ways. It is very religious, and so as he comes out, there is a procession. It's a solemn procession. We do have our band playing music, and we will light candles as well this time around at the same time because Mary will be there. And then we'll proceed into the church where there's going to be a solemn mass. And in that mass, we have a pastor or a priest who's prepared homilies pretty well all week. He started on Wednesday. Anybody wanted to come and listen to that. And then he culminates with two big masses, which is the one on Saturday and then the one on Sunday in the afternoon. And the one on Saturday, again, is that whole opening of here is, and the presentation here is our king type of thing. And he will then be placed on the altar while that ceremony is going on. That evening, because we are a social group, there will also be some activities in our hall. And so we've got a singer, we've got Portuguese food. Anybody wants to come out and have some piri chicken. I think you guys have heard of this before. So that roasted chicken that we have that's pretty famous, our bifana, which is a pork sandwich, and then a variety of different things. So people gather for the event, only to return on Sunday for the actual big solemn mass. And after that mass, he comes out again. And the procession's a little longer. So it actually will take probably about 45 minutes to an hour out in procession.
For the Portuguese community, sort of events like this, I'm assuming like events and traditions like this are incredibly important then.
They're incredibly important. And this is where you hear the stories of when, it's kind of like when I was, and it's like, wow, yeah, okay, that's cool. A lot of history, a lot of stories of tradition. This is where I heard it because the people gather. There isn't a lot of written stuff in Winnipeg about some of that history. A lot of the Portuguese people who came to Canada at the time weren't the strongest literate people either, so they weren't writing books or anything like that. But we heard these stories by these gatherings, and we would sit down and listen to everybody, and it was actually quite nice. A lot of what I know is actually attending these things. I also love traditional folklore and the folk music because I play a few instruments, and that's where I learned how to play some of these things. And now they ask me to come to participate, and so I went from this learning phase to now they've asked me to be there and perform for them. So it's a great place to continue with our culture. You'll see folk dancers, you'll see singers, playing of different instruments, and just, again, maintaining and keeping those traditions alive.
So this procession would be very different from one you might see out in Rome.
Yeah, I mean, back in the island where this is from, it's a much larger one. The amount of people will be just astronomically more, and everything's outside, right? So you still have the gathering. People still want to gather, and they'll still gather there. I've been there to watch some of those gatherings as well. And again, those traditions continue, and then they have to pass it down to the younger people too, even there. So right, and so they do, but it's all usually outside as opposed to indoors. We're very finicky weather out here. We just finally got to the 20s, so this is why we kind of do that indoors. We've tried it outdoors before, but again, May can be really interesting. We can have snow.
You never know what you're going to get. So,
you never know.
Cross your fingers, right?
Exactly.
Well, thank you, Henry, for taking the time to share a little bit about this practice, this tradition. I know it was very interesting just seeing the video of what it is. And from someone outside of it, it's like, wow, what is this?
And it's good to know sort of the background and the understanding behind it as well, because at the surface, it's like, what? This is not Jesus. Like, Jesus doesn't do this. And again, it's not necessarily the concept of Jesus is being ordained in this way, or it isn't. We understand that humble man who is God at the same time. But yeah, once a year, he's our king, and we're gonna tell everybody.
Have any stories you'd like us to share? Communities we should highlight? Leave a comment on our social media or reach out to us on our website. I'm Ryan Funk. This was You Talk, and have yourself a good one.